I think we will just we'll kick off. If anyone else, obviously, if they want to come in, Ashley can admit them anyways. If they have problems following the link, anyways. But yeah, without further ado, I won't keep you more than 1 minute. My name's Eamon. I'm with the Lough Landscape Partnership, and we have two people here this evening, outstanding in their own field, no pun intended. And I suppose today's webinar is with funding provided from the National Lottery Heritage Fund. And it's in conjunction with Fermanagh District Council and also NIAA, okay? The two people that we have speaking this evening, we have Rose Moore from the NIAA. She's going to speak first. And then that's going to be followed by Amy Gallagher from Fermanagh District Council. If at any point anyone has any questions on anything, we can just put it into the chat. Or alternatively, if you have problems accessing the chat or you have problems with your Zoom or whatever, you can hold on till the end, and we'll come up with some of the questions at the end as well. We'll have a question and answer session at the end if you need that as well. So without further ado, I suppose I'm going to hand the floor over to Rose. Rose, when you're ready.
Evening, everybody. Ooh.
Apologies, can you see the screen? Oh, sorry, I will
there
just
we
go back to the front.
Back to the beginning.
Apologies. There we go. Can you see now, Rose?
Yes, thanks.
Perfect.
Yeah. As you can see, this is just an introduction to invasive species in Northern Ireland. I'm going to start with a bit of background because there's a lot of strange definitions get bandied about. And we're often asked about what's the difference between a non-native and an invasive non-native. And animals and plants have been introduced usually, hang on, I can't see the whole of the screen, sorry. Oh yeah, usually by human actions to parts of the world outside their natural range, so they're a long way from home, are known as non-native species. Many of those non-native species are important to our economy and society, in particular agricultural and garden plants. They're valued both commercially and aesthetically and have not become established outside human influence habitats. Most of the non-native species never cause any problems. There are far more harmless non-native species present in Northern Ireland than invasive ones. So the invasive ones are those that have been introduced deliberately or accidentally, which manage to adapt to their new surroundings and eventually establish themselves in the wild. It's thought that only 10 to 15% of introduced non-natives actually become invasive and manage to adapt to their new surroundings, eventually establishing themselves in the wild. And you can see there's a few examples there. We've got zebra mussels, and we've got the parakeets, and we've got the giant rhubarb. They can cause significant ecological or economic damage to the wildlife habitats and urban economy of Northern Ireland. And we've got American skunk cabbage on the left and slider turtles in the middle and the Asian hornet on the right, which thankfully hasn't arrived yet, but the other two have. Definitions are sometimes confusing. You'll see the term invasive alien species, IAS, used in many documents, especially relating to the EU regulation. This arose after a public survey was carried out in GB asking sort of what people knew about invasive species, and the word alien is the word that's used in the EU, but most thought that it was visitors from outer space. So it was decided then that the 4 UK jurisdictions would use the definition invasive non-native species, and that's where INS came from, and any of our sort of national legislation and references. Why are they a problem? Invasive species have been identified as one of the 5 main drivers of biodiversity loss globally. That wee diagram just shows you where they sit with all the other things. So you've got direct exploitation of organisms, that's like things like overfishing, change in land and sea use, pollution, and climate change, and invasive species is up there with all the rest. To try and reduce the impacts across Europe, the EU Invasive Alien Species Regulation came into force actually on the 1st of January 2015. The regulation imposes strict restrictions on a list of species known as species of union concern. Restrictions apply to all of the species listed, subject to exemptions, along with not being allowed to import, keep, breed, transport, sell, or exchange, allowed to reproduce, grow, or cultivate, or release into the environment. Listed pets may be kept for the remainder of their natural lives without a permit, provided they were owned before the species in question was listed. These are referred to as companion animals. And there's quite a few of these in the country that people aren't aware of. The one on the left, there's a raccoon, and the king snake's in the middle, and that's a mongoose on the right. And there are definitely some of those in Northern Ireland. We then brought in the implementing Northern Ireland legislation. Invasive Alien Species Enforcement and Permitting Order came into force on the 1st of December 2019. And unlike the Wildlife Order, which was really all we had previously, it required the PSNI to enforce. We also had to take police with us anywhere. This regulation gives their INS officials or those that they nominate powers of entry if there's any suspicion that a property contains a banned species. And as of August 2023, there are now 88 species of union concern. 47 animals range from mammals, amphibians, reptiles, fish, invertebrates, bacteria and other microorganisms, and 41 plants. All of these species have been accepted as meeting agreed criteria concerning their invasiveness and ability to establish in several member states. In fact, they've done risk assessments to prove that. These are just graphics of the 88 species. And those three animals on the left are probably ones that we all know. We had the ruddy duck here in Northern Ireland, grey squirrel and the raccoon. And then over on the right, we've got the giant hogweed and Himalayan balsam would be the most commonly known ones. Probably the most common species to be smuggled. These are ones that people are trying to bring in illegally. Or turtles, signal crayfish, raccoons, raccoon dogs, or parts thereof, which is gruesome, but apparently their tails are a very popular thing for people to buy, and chipmunks. Management of invasions that are already widely spread. Article 19 of the regulation requires that landowners produce management measures for widely spread species. Department consulted on and produced management measures guidance documents for those which have been designated as widely spread species. And they're defined in Article 19 as an invasive alien species whose population has gone beyond the naturalisation stage, in which a population is self-sustaining and has spread to colonise a large part of the potential range where it can survive and produce. As they also did in GB, we were permitted to select some species which actually hadn't started that sort of naturalisation stage, but we felt were still a threat from a social, economic or health impact. And the yellow-bellied sliders, although we've no evidence of them actually breeding here yet, we know that they carry salmonella and they do a lot of damage to water birds, nests and things like that. The legislation allows us to ensure all landowners are being proactive to trap, manage and remove widely spread species from their land. As the competent authority for enforcing this legislation, we can penalise landowners who do not carry out the required management on their land. And there's just some pictures of traps and things there. Sorry. There's the grey squirrel trap and the turtle trap, and that's somebody raking out aquatic weeds. And the picture on the right is actually an experiment that was carried out in Scotland, where they've discovered that sheep quite happily graze on giant hogweed. So we're trying to get people to do that here. Widely spread species is one of another ones is the Gunnera tinctoria, and it was designated as one of the 11 widely spread species. It obligates all the landowners to try and reduce their distribution through Northern Ireland by 50% by 2030, which is a big ask, but we're getting there. Some recent updates to the IS legislation. Many plants formerly identified as Gunnera manicata are now thought to be a hybrid of Gunnera tinctoria known as Gunnera cryptica. And it has long been believed that the giant Gunnera plants in many of our gardens and estates are one of two species, the Gunnera manicata or Gunnera tinctoria. Gunnera manicata is a benign and attractive plant originating in Brazil and Chile, while the tinctoria version is highly invasive, spreads rapidly and chokes and shades out native flora. The unfortunate thing they've found out in this recent study is they've reached the conclusion that Gunnera manicata is no longer present in the horticulture trade and has instead been replaced by this hybrid of Tinctoria cryptica. And basically all the tests, DNA testing and analysis that they've done has shown that the plant's now widely cultivated in Britain and Ireland under the name of manicata were all the hybrids, and that the true species is no longer found here or in Britain. Any garden centres or horticulture suppliers now need to be careful they're not selling the illegal hybrid. It's an offence to intentionally place listed invasive species on the market. If asked by DAERA officials, they will need to provide suitable evidence. ID tips can be found in the study that was done to prove this. That's a little example of it on the left there. They're actually very detailed and helpful. But the best method would be to determine their stocks by genetic testing. And another designated widely spread species is the grey squirrel. And I want to get across that it's not just a red squirrel issue. We know the grey squirrel has obviously had a bad impact on the red squirrel, but it also can cause serious problems for foresters and native wildlife. The bark stripping from tree trunks, especially during the months of May and June, damages stands of timber and natural woodland. And in spring, the taking of eggs and young chicks can be devastating for songbird and ground nesting bird populations. And this is just a few examples of what grey squirrel can do to a tree. And they can actually kill trees. So once they sort of ring bark, that's the tree finished. Many of the most damaging non-native invasive species live in or around water bodies. That is why it's important for all water users, conservation volunteers and anglers to be aware of biosecurity. The main campaigns to raise public awareness are check, clean, dry. And sort of a definition really, what is biosecurity? Because we bandy that word about and it gets used for things like disease and stuff like that. So in our context, we mean taking steps to make sure that good hygiene practices are in place to reduce and minimize the risk of spreading invasive non-native species. A good biosecurity routine is always essential, even if invasive non-native species are not always apparent. Even if you can't see them, they could be there. Everyone visiting a water body is responsible for helping to avoid the spread of non-native species on their clothes, equipment, and everything else that comes into contact with water. For this reason, we should all raise awareness about biosecurity for all water users. Campaigns to advise anglers returning from abroad or moving from one water body to another are the sort of thing that they're included in this Check, Clean, Dry campaign. It's when you go on holidays and take your fishing or water sports equipment with you. Just be careful, think what you might be bringing back with you. So make sure you've cleaned everything before you come home. And the campaigns to advise all water sport users returning from abroad or moving from one water body to another. So there's a lot of people do kayaking and paddle boarding and things now, and they take all their equipment with them. So please try and be careful and make sure that you're not bringing anything back, because there's some far worse things on the European continent than there are here that we don't want. And these are just some of the campaigns that we run. So it's Check Clean Dry and Be Plant Wise, or it's basically be careful what you're planting. There's lots of advice on our website about things that you can plant instead, alternatives to invasive plants. And the Don't Let It Loose, Be Pet Wise campaign is about a lot of people buy these exotic pets, get bored with them, or they get too big, or they get bitten by them, and they think it's a good idea just to dump it in the nearby pond or river. And a classic example, the zebra mussel. We've known for some time about the presence of zebra mussels in many of our nutrient-rich eutrophic water bodies. Promotion of biosecurity campaigns such as Check Clean Dry have not been taken seriously by many water users, both recreational and commercial. This has resulted in their spread and increase far beyond their original arrival in the Iron system.
Apologies, Rose.
In the Iron system in the mid-1990s. And now we have the risk of the quagga mussel arriving. And this is just some ID to show you the difference. It's very difficult to tell if they're in the water, but I think the picture on the left-hand side that shows the lateral views gives you a good idea. One is much sort of more the triangular shape, and it sort of can sit on its edge, and the other is sort of rounder. And the quagga mussel tends to be bigger, but then that's not really helpful because they could be just at different stages of growth. But the zebra mussel has got very zigzag marks on it. It is quite distinctive. And the quagga tends to be a bit paler. So if you see any of these, we definitely would like to know. And that's just a little bit more about the ID. It sits flat on its ventral side and it's triangular. And the other one, the quagga, sort of wouldn't sit like that. It'll fall over. And it's much sort of more round. And if you want to know any more about the ID, we've got ID guides on the website. Please feel free to go download them there. One of the main reasons these plants and animals find their way into our waterways is members of the public releasing goldfish, turtles, and the contents of their fish tanks, invasive aquatic plants too, that they no longer want. This Be Pet Wise campaign is to try and promote that. It's a campaign across all the BIC countries, British Irish Council that is, and it provides advice for pet owners and traders and raises public awareness. It's been adopted, as I say, across all the British Irish Council administrations. It really gives a lot of advice about if you're thinking of buying one of these animals, to really think about it and sort of think about what it might look like a year from now or 2 years from now. Would you be able to handle it? So it's just to make people stop and think. These are resources on our website that you can download.
Apologies.
That you can download, so we've plenty of posters, and we can send you printed copies as well if you want. So please make use of those if you've got clubs or things where you want to display them. We're happy to provide those to you. And if you see any of these species that I've highlighted or anything that you're a bit worried about on sale or display or in the wild, you can enter the details online on either the Cedar or iRecord or iNaturalist, or if you have a smartphone, by the iRecord app, all of which automatically generate an email to us. We get to know about it within, I think it's something like 2 minutes from when you enter it. Just saying that's spelled wrong. Anyway, not to worry. If you click on that app on the right-hand side, it actually runs, Amy.
Oh,
The right-hand one.
oh, sorry. Oh, yes.
Actually shows you, it demonstrates it, just a quick demonstration on how you actually enter something on your phone. think it's giant hogweed on this one. So it's quite easy. It literally just puts it all in there for you. And you can tap the map and it does it all for you. So we encourage people to use that. Most of us carry smartphones wherever you are. And don't worry if you're not sure about the identification, because that's what we're there for. We verify the records. So we do hope that people put in records wherever they see things. Thanks for running that one, Amy.
All right, that's a brilliant app.
Clever, isn't it?
Very clever.
And that's it done.
It's very easy to do.
Now, ignore the old logo. That Invasive Species Ireland doesn't exist anymore. You can also enter records on the report a sighting button on our Invasive Species Northern Ireland website. So none of these are suitable. You can just contact us directly via email or phone. And feel free to get those details off us afterwards if you can't have time to get them now. And again, we have since December 2019 relied mainly on our official monitoring systems to find out where widely spread species are. But we can also learn about their whereabouts from environmental farming schemes, Environment Fund applications, field working staff, planning applications, and direct email reports from a variety of other sources. Currently, we verify only those reports that are accompanied by images, unless we know the skills of the recorder to be trustworthy. So please always try and get a photograph if you're uploading. It really does help us. And if you've any trouble identifying species, take a picture and load it up to one of the recording portals, or download over 70 ID guides that we've got on the website to help you. If you've any doubts, you should find something there to help you. A great resource to find out about distribution of not just invasive species, but all species in Northern Ireland is the NBN Atlas Northern Ireland. We've now got our own hub for specifically Northern Ireland. So all the records that are put in eventually end up on this mapping system. So if you think it's doubtful about a species being where you saw it, so it's a good place to check if it's ever been seen there before. And just one thing that we need to be aware of, a recent report by IPBES highlighted some of the key findings that they found was by 4 times rise in the economic cost of biological invasions in every decade since 1970. 1,215 of local extinctions of native species caused by 218 invasive alien species. 90% of global extinctions on islands attributed mainly to invasive species. So those are serious figures. And funding is the last thing I was going to talk about. Is the department continues to encourage and fund by the Environment Fund, Water Quality Improvement Grants, Challenge Fund, and environmental farming schemes, many community groups, non-government organisations, farmers and landowners to carry out management and removal of invasive species from their land, prioritising designated and high-value biodiversity sites. Thanks for listening, and I'm going to hand you over to Amy now, who's going to tell you a bit more about the management of some of your local invasive species.
Great, Rose. Thanks so much, Rose. That's great.
Thank you so much, Rose. That was really, really informative. I feel like I got a lot out of that anyway, so I did.
Too boring on the legislation side.
No, it's all very important. So it is the legislation. It definitely is something that we need to take into consideration. But I'm just going to talk to you a wee bit about some of the key species that we deal with here within our council area. So probably 3 of our most prominent species. Most of you have probably heard of these. They're Japanese knotweed, Himalayan balsam, and giant hogweed. So I'm just going to talk you a little bit through each of their backgrounds, their a little bit about how to identify them, a couple of easily confused species that are, can look quite similar, and a little bit about our management or what sort of techniques we can use. So we'll start with Japanese knotweed. So Japanese knotweed is a highly invasive plant species that poses significant ecological and economic challenges. So it's native to East Asia, so specifically China, Korea, and Japan. And it was introduced to Europe and North America in the 19th century as an ornamental plant, which is the way an awful lot of our plant species invasives have been introduced to Northern Ireland. And in Northern Ireland, it has become a major concern due to its aggressive growth and ability to outcompete native vegetations. So within its native ranges, Japanese knotweed is a well integrated component of the ecosystem. Its growth is naturally regulated by environmental factors such as herbivores and pathogens, preventing it from becoming overly invasive. This contrasts sharply to here in the UK, where we do not have the same natural enemies that it would have in Asia, so it's able to grow at free will, basically. And again, once we look at the climatic conditions, the differences, so within its native ranges, it's dealing with growing on the side of volcanoes and sub-zero climate. So when you think about it, when it comes here, it's ideal. It's not having to deal with those extreme temperature changes. So when it comes here, it just really takes over. So it's something that we have to consider when managing it, that this is not something that people in their native ranges are having to deal with. And it's very important. That's why it's so important when you're to not be taking invasive or taking species from other countries and bringing them here without checking first that it is okay to do so. So a bit more about Japanese knotweed. So the plant itself has an extensive deep rhizome system, and I'll talk a little bit more about that in the next slide. But it can penetrate up to 3 meters into the ground and spread horizontally up to 7 meters. So that's when you look at a single plant. So you can see the one plant above the ground. Underneath the ground, its rhizome system could be spreading 7 meters in every direction and 3 meters down. So when you're dealing with that plant, you're not just dealing with that one single plant, you have to deal with that entire area. And Japanese knotweed can have severe ecological and economic impacts. For example, biodiversity loss, because Japanese knotweed forms dense thickets that overshadow native plants, which reduces biodiversity. It negatively alters local wildlife and it alters habitats. It can affect soil health. Its dense root system can destabilize soil and increase the risk of erosion along riverbanks and slopes. And the plant's growth along waterways can alter hydrological cycles and increase the risk of flooding by impeding water flow. And the economic impact can be pretty severe as well. So it can cause property damage. So as you can see in the photo on the slide, Japanese knotweed has come up through tarmac, which just shows how hardy it is and how, if there's any imperfections in the build, so same with foundations of people's houses, it can grow up through them and cause structural damage to buildings, roads, infrastructure by going through concrete tarmac building foundations. So it can cause really significant problems, and because of this, it can affect the value of properties. So properties infested with Japanese knotweed often experience reduced market value, and sellers and buyers may face challenges in securing mortgages or insurance. And the costs for control and eradication efforts are expensive and can require long-term commitments, and costs can run into the thousands of pounds per site. I know I have worked previously in the private sector, working with developers, a lot of which would have had sites with Japanese knotweed. And I can remember one such instance where a developer was building houses on land with Japanese knotweed, and it turned out it was cheaper for him in the long run to exclude 4 houses from his development than it would be to manage the knotweed, which just show and to leave a buffer zone from the knotweed, which just shows how expensive it can run. Thousands of pounds, it can be tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of pounds, depending on the size and scale. So it's just something to be aware of, is the immense costs that can come with having to treat knotweed. But if you are the landowner, you do have a duty and you have a responsibility to do that. But consult with invasive species specialists and they'll be able to advise you on the best way forward. So some key identification features. So Japanese knotweed stems are often the first giveaway. They resemble bamboo with distinct nodes between the segments. The stems are hollow and can grow up to 3 meters tall and have a reddish brown hue. So you can see in some of the pictures there's almost purple specks on some of the stems, and the stems tend to zigzag. And in the springtime, I'll be able to show you pictures on the next slide, but new shoots emerge with a reddish purplish tint, and these very quickly grow into very dense thickets. And for the leaves, to me, I find the leaves are the biggest giveaway. The leaves are a very distinguishing feature. They are broadly heart-shaped. I would call them almost spade-shaped because they're almost flat at the bottom with a pointed edge on the other side. And each leaf is around 10 to 15 centimeters long and grows in an alternate pattern along the stem, which you can see in that picture on the left. So they grow on alternate stems along this like little reddy brown stem, and the leaves are bright green as they grow, and they create a really lush, dense foliage. And Japanese knotweed also flower between late summer and early autumn. It produces a small, creamy white flower that grows in clusters, each about 10 to 15 centimeters long. The flower gives the plant a lacy appearance from a distance and attracts various pollinators. It's actually quite a pretty plant. It's when you don't know what you're looking at, it's quite pretty, but that's the same, I guess, for Himalayan balsam as well, which is why people brought them over to have in their gardens. And then the roots and the rhizomes. So the root system is probably the most challenging aspect of Japanese knotweed. It has extensive networks of rhizomes that can spread, as I said before, 7 meters horizontally and penetrate 3 meters deep into the soil. So the rhizomes are thick and woody with a characteristic orange or yellow interior. And even small fragments can regenerate into new plants, making it difficult to control. So the rhizomes, I find, tend to look like, because when you're finding them, when you're digging through the soil, they can almost look like bits of tree roots. But the way you tell is when you break it open, it'll be orange in the inside, and there'll be wee little pores inside. I always think of it like a glow stick that you used to get at the discos when you're young. Once you broke that rhizome, you can't put it back together. It's then going to start spreading. But it is something, if you come across or you're not sure, take some pictures, send it to NIA, even send it to us in the council, or send it to invasive species specialist, and we'll be able to help you with that ID. So I just want to talk a little bit about Japanese knotweed throughout the season, because we're not all going to be lucky enough to always be identifying during summer when it's easiest, when the flowers are out and the leaves are at its pinnacle. So I just want to talk a little bit about the different seasons and how the plant looks different in it. So for the spring, in spring, you should be looking for red or purple shoots emerging from the ground. These shoots grow rapidly, turning green as they develop. So these shoots grow up in a very quick amount of time. They're almost like little arrowheads coming out of the soil in the very early stages, and they're very red shoots, and you might get a couple of green little leaves. And if you come back a week later, there'll be quite a bit of growth in between. And then during summer, the plant reaches its full height, and the leaves form dense canopies like bamboo-like stems and become more noticeable, and the flowers will be starting to come out in about August time. But in summer, you should be able to identify Japanese knotweed quite easily, as it'll just probably have started to take over unless it has just recently been brought to the site. And in autumn, the plant will still be in flower, and you can see the creamy white clusters of the flower, which you can see up in the third picture on the top. In the summer section, you can see some of those white flowers up there. And the leaves may start to go yellow and drop off as the plant starts to prepare for winter. And then in winter, the plant dies back to its rhizome, leaving behind dead brown stems. These dead canes can remain standing, making it easier to spot possible infestations. So the canes can be a red colour for younger canes, and they can actually become a bit whiter the older the canes are. But I would say if you're within an area of Japanese knotweed, I would say a really important thing is about biosecurity, as Rose mentioned earlier. So me personally, I keep a brush and shovel in the back of my car, so that if I know I'm out surveying invasive species, or if I just happen to come across them, I can clean my boots. So I stamp out my boots when I'm leaving that area, and I would then clean out in between the little grooves in my shoes to make sure I'm not taking any rhizome home with me in my shoes. First of all, because I do not want to cause the spread of Japanese knotweed, and secondly, I definitely don't want to cause the spread to my garden at home. And I would prefer not to take the property value down of my house if I can help it. But it's really important to make sure you're following biosecurity when you're dealing with any invasive species, making sure that you've cleaned down the sides of your trousers, you've wiped them down before you've left the area, to make sure that you are not carrying any rhizome, seeds, anything like that from invasive species back home with you. And here's some common species that it's easily mistaken for. So dogwood has a similar color of a leaf, as you can see in this first picture. It also has alternating kind of leaves, although the leaves are a bit rounder. It doesn't show it very well in this picture, but the leaves or the stem can grow to be quite red, which also makes it easily confusable with Japanese knotweed. However, the stems are not hollow like knotweeds, and they do not have bamboo-like segmented appearances. And the leaves are generally more oval and arranged oppositely on the stem, not like the alternating pattern of Japanese knotweed. But dogwood, like knotweed, produces a cluster of small white flowers, but their overall growth habit and leaf shape is different. But it's just something to be aware of when you're trying to identify knotweed or you're identifying dogwood, to just give it a couple of extra minutes when you're identifying to make sure you've got it right. The next two species that I've included is hybrid knotweed and giant knotweed. I would like to point out that these two are also invasive species. They are slightly less common than Japanese knotweed, but the management options are actually pretty similar. But it's always important to make sure you're identifying the right plants. So giant knotweed is larger than Japanese knotweed, as you would assume by the name, with leaves that can be up to 40 centimeters long. The leaves are more elongated and heart-shaped than Japanese knotweed. And hybrid knotweeds are harder to identify because they are somewhere in between giant knotweed and Japanese knotweed. The leaves can be up to 23 centimeters long, and the shape is somewhat in between the two species. So sometimes when you're not sure, is it giant hogweed, is it Japanese knotweed, or sorry, is it giant knotweed or Japanese knotweed? You know, sometimes it will actually be a hybrid of both species, or a hybrid of other types of knotweed species. So it's just something to be aware of, that exists, and to make sure that we're managing it appropriately. And the last one I've included is broadleaf dock. It's something that I found in the beginning of my career that I would find confusing, not so much during summer, but in winter time. So broadleaf dock in the winter time has a very red stem, similar to the Japanese knotweed in the winter. And they're both commonly found on derelict sites. So when they're sharing similar habitats, it can sometimes be confusing, but it's just about taking an extra few minutes when you're trying to identify it, to double check that you have it right. I always use some plant ID books, and I also have some apps on my phone. Picture This I find very good, to help me identify if I'm struggling in the field. And I always take lots of pictures so I can go back and look at my books again if I need to make sure I'm confident on my identification. So managing Japanese knotweed. So there's lots of different methods we can use to manage Japanese knotweed, and within the Fermanagh District Council we use lots of different methods. But I would like to point out that management methods for Japanese knotweed are site specific. You know, not one solution will fit all. Unlikely it'll be a combination of methods that will be used. So the first one we talk about is herbicides. So this method involves applying chemical herbicides to knotweed to kill it. It's effective when used correctly. Herbicides can effectively kill above ground plants and some of the root system. However, as a con to that pro, I would be saying that it sometimes will not be able to penetrate deep enough into the soil to kill the entire rhizome network. Japanese knotweed can lie dormant for up to 30 years, which is something to be aware of. However, it's a very cost-efficient solution, and it's less expensive and it has lower labor intensity than some of the other methods. It is worth noting that it can harm non-targeted plants and animals, and can contaminate water sources. However, if we're doing things close to water sources, we should be considering using in situ injections to make sure that we're targeting the plant specific. Stockpiling is another option. So this method involves excavating the knotweed and stockpiling it on a contained site to prevent further spread. So it contains the knotweed, which is great, and prevents it from spreading. And it's an immediate, quick solution that removes the knotweed from the treated area. However, you need a large area of space to be able to do this, and the cost can be expensive due to excavation and transportation costs, and it will require long-term monitoring to ensure the stockpile material does not regenerate. Screening is not something that I've ever personally used, but it is definitely a method that is becoming more frequent. So it involves sifting through the soil to remove knotweed rhizomes. So while I would do that whilst I'm doing environmental clerks of work, so when I'm out on site making sure that we've gotten all the knotweed, I wouldn't necessarily do this as my main option. But it can be effective and reduce the amount of knotweed rhizome density in the soil, and allows for the reuse of treated soil, reducing waste. However, this is very labour intensive and requires significant manual labour and machinery, and due to that, it can be quite costly. Also, there's a risk that not all the rhizome will be removed, leading to potential regrowth. Another option is rhizome fragmentation and cultivation. This method involves fragmenting and cultivating the rhizomes and removing the crowns to prevent regrowth. It is very detailed and can target specific areas of infestation, and it's non-chemical and avoids the use of herbicides. Once again, it's labour intensive and requires a lot of manual labour and very precise work. But there is a very big regrowth risk, as incomplete removal can result in regrowth. Burial, burying the knotweed deep underground at least 5 meters to prevent it from resurfacing. This is a very effective method. If done correctly, it prevents regrowth and it quickly removes visible knotweed. It does, however, take up a large amount of space and can be expensive due to the excavation and transport costs again. Also, it's just need to be aware of regulations, so it may be subject to environmental regulations and restrictions, so please always check beforehand to make sure that you are allowed to do that. Root barrier. So installing a physical barriers underground to prevent the spread of knotweed rhizome. So root barrier is a special type of material that will block Japanese knotweed from being able to come up through, and it helps contain it, and it's very effective at containing the spread of knotweed, and it's long lasting if installed correctly. But the key to that is if installed correctly, you do need a certain amount of expertise to be able to do that. The cost of installation is definitely a con there, and it can be labour intensive, and the initial cost of installation can be expensive as well, and requires regular monitoring and maintenance. Landfill is the last option that I'm going to be talking about. So that will include excavating and transporting knotweed infested soil to a licensed landfill material or landfill site. So you cannot just take Japanese knotweed to any landfill site. You have to take it to a specialised one, and currently in Northern Ireland we only have one landfill site which is able to take Japanese knotweed. So that obviously increases the costs for removal, but it does allow for complete removal, physical removal of knotweed from the site, and it's regulated and disposed of in a controlled and monitored way. But as I said, there is high costs involved due to excavation, transport, and landfill fees. And you must comply with waste disposal regulations, so that's just something to be aware of. But managing Japanese knotweed overall, I would say, requires a strategic approach tailored to specific sites and circumstances. Each method has its pros and cons, and often a combination of treatment options yield the best result. I would always advise to seek professional advice before starting any Japanese knotweed management project to ensure you're complying with local regulations and to maximize effectiveness. So definitely always consult a professional before undertaking this sort of work. So Himalayan balsam, as the name would suggest, it is native to the Himalayas. Like knotweed, it was introduced to Northern Ireland in the 19th century, and it spread rapidly and become a significant concern to native ecosystems. So it is a tall annual plant, typically growing between 1 to 2 meters in height. It has distinctive pinky purple flowers with a hooded shape, giving it a very unique appearance, as you can see in the photo on the screen. The leaves are serrated and arranged in opposite pairs along the stem. So the habitat for Himalayan balsam, it tends to thrive in damp riparian habitats such as riverbanks, ditches, and wet woodlands. Its ability to colonize these areas quickly allows it to outcompete native vegetation and disrupt local ecosystems. It has its reproductive strategy is quite unusual. It is known for its explosive seed dispersal mechanism. So when the seed pods mature, they explode upon touch, scattering the seeds up to several meters away. And when we take into account they grow on the side of riverbanks, these then sometimes be carried downstream to new sites, which is why it spreads so rapidly along our river corridors. It does cause impacts to our native species. The shallow root system can contribute to soil erosion along riverbanks, especially during the winter months, as it faces winter dieback. Or Himalayan balsam dies back in the winter, leaving the riverbanks exposed and vulnerable to flooding. This erosion can lead to sedimentation in water bodies, impacting aquatic habitats and water quality. Also, it's a prolific nectar production, which is attractive to pollinators. And now, whilst that sounds like a great thing, it actually attracts our pollinators, or our bees and our butterflies and the likes, away from our native flowers. So it's not pollinating our native flowers, and instead is helping Himalayan balsam to grow. So it's just something to be aware of, and whilst you might see lots of bees in and around Himalayan balsam, and you might think, oh, this is brilliant for the bees, it's not the plant that we'd like our bees to be pollinating. So a little bit about their identification. So they have a pink and sometimes white, almost white appearing flower petals, and it's got a very unique shape, like a helmet. Sometimes people call them like a policeman's helmet or a bonnet. They can grow up to 3 meters tall, and they flower in June to October time. And they have hanging explosive seed bombs that can throw the seeds over 7 meters away from the plant. They have hexagonal, fleshy, hollow stems that are reddish in color, and dark green lance-shaped leaves with serrated edges and pointed tips. And they have very shallow roots, so you should be able to pull them out of the ground with very little effort. And Himalayan balsam throughout the seasons. So once again, spring, you're looking for emerging reddish shoots and early leaf formation, as you can see in the March to June picture. And in summer, you identify the plant by its height and distinctive pink flowers and large serrated leaves. And in autumn, you'd notice the presence of the seed pods and the transition of the leaf colour. And winter, you'll begin to observe dead stem patches with a focus on bare patches. So there'll be lots of dead canes on the ground and bare soil. So it's just something to be aware of. It is very hard in winter time to fully, whilst if you have a very large infestation, you might be able to see a couple of stems. It's very hard to be able to grasp how extensive the issue is in winter time. So it's always best to be surveying in summer, or if you're surveying in the winter, to come back in the summer to see what the situation is like at that point. So one of the easily mistaken species is orange balsam. So obviously in the summer months, they're very easy to separate due to the different coloured petals, but they are very similar in earlier stages of growth. So yeah, so the leaves of Himalayan balsam are about 2.5 to 4 centimeters long, compared to its orange counterpart, which is about 2 centimeters to 3 centimeters. And Himalayan balsam also has a greater overall height than orange balsam. However, this will only really be an issue in the springtime, as I say, in summer and coming into the autumn time, you'll be able to see the flower petals, and it should be pretty easy to tell. And Himalayan balsam management. So there's a couple of different ways that we can manage Himalayan balsam. One of the best ways is balsam bashing or hand pulling. So this is very low cost and requires minimal financial investment. It's environmentally friendly. It has no chemical impacts on the ecosystem. But it is only suitable for small infestations because of the amount of manual labor that is required. And it may require that it need to be done more than once, so it may need repeated efforts. Another option is to cutting and mowing. So you would want to cut below the first node. This is effective for reducing the height of the plant and keeping it at a manageable level and reducing the seed production. However, regular maintenance is required, frequent cutting to prevent the regrowth, and sometimes cutting can stimulate regrowth, so it's just something to be mindful of. So new shoots can emerge from cut stems. Grazing is another option. So it's a natural control. Livestock can feed on the plant and can control the growth. However, there is limited access to areas. A lot of times we are on riverbanks. It's not suitable for livestock, so it's not always an option that is available to us. Herbicides is very effective for large-scale infestations. However, sometimes if it can cause for non-target species being affected, once again, we would be using stem injections when we're near water. And expertise are required to ensure that proper application and safety precautions are undertaken. All of this also has to be done at the appropriate times of year. Biocontrol, so is natural enemy introduction, insects or fungi to reduce plant growth. It's a long-term solution. Once established, they persist. However, it's a slow process and it takes time to see results. There's also unknown risks to native plants by putting something else, by pulling in another non-native thing into our environment. We don't know how our native plants are going to react to that. So it's something that has to be done in trials, and it has to be done slowly and done correctly. And it has to be done in consultation with NIEA, CABI, and people like that. Also, once again, we can go landfill. So it will permanently remove the plants. It's suitable for large scale infestations. However, once again, it's expensive and proper disposal is needed. Dredging. It helps remove the plants from the water bodies, which can improve aquatic habitats. However, it can disrupt ecosystems and impact on other aquatic organisms, and it can be costly and require specialist equipment and planning. Just once again, to remember to always seek advice from a professional before implementing any management method. Each site may require a tailored approach based on its unique characteristics, so just always keep that in mind. And the last species I'm going to talk about is giant hogweed. So giant hogweed is native to Western Caucasus region of Eurasia. It was introduced to Britain in the 19th century as an ornamental plant like Himalayan balsam and Japanese knotweed. It was initially valued for its size and stunning appearance, which when flowering, and it had escaped cultivation and naturalized in the wild. So giant hogweed has spread throughout the UK, colonizing UK and Ireland, colonizing wastelands, streams, riverbanks, roads, and railways. It is easily transported along watercourses, contributing to its widespread distribution. The plant thrives in derelict gardens, neglected urban areas, waste grounds, and along waterways. So some physical characteristics: when fully grown, it can reach heights of 1.5 to 5 meters with a spread of 1 to 2 meters. Its rosettes of jagged lobed leaves appear in the first year, followed by a flower spike in the second year. The flower cluster in the umbrella-like heads called umbels, and face upwards, blooming in June and July. One really important point I want to make about giant hogweed is the sap of giant hogweed can cause burns due to the sensitivity to sunlight. So it can cause severe skin burns, as you can see in that picture below. So the giant hogweed sap contains toxins that can cause severe dermatitis, sunlight sensitivity. If the sap gets on your skin and is exposed to sunlight, UV radiation activates compounds in the sap, which will cause blistering, and the contact will cause very painful blisterings on the skin. And the long-term effects, the blisterings may recur over months or even years. And there's a risk to blindness as well if giant hogweed sap comes in contact with your eyes. So if any of this happens, rinse your eyes out thoroughly with water and seek urgent medical attention if exposed. I just want you all to remember to exercise extreme caution when dealing with giant hogweed to avoid health risks. Never, if you are unsure about the species and you're not sure whether it's giant hogweed or something else, please do not touch it. Report it, let us know that you have found it, but whatever you do, try not to touch it because it can cause severe health risks. And the seeds can also remain viable for up to 15 years. So for identification, the stem is green with purple blotches and covered in stiff white bristle hairs. It's hollow on the inside with ridges and a thick circle of hairs at the base of each leaf stalk. The leaves are huge. They can be up to 1.5 meters wide. Well, they can be actually huge, up to 1.5 meters wide and 3 meters long, and they're deeply divided into smaller leaflets. They almost resemble rhubarb leaves with irregular, sharp and jagged edges, and the underside of the leaf is hairy. The flowers appear from June to July, as I mentioned earlier, and a small white or slightly pinky flower, and they're clustered on umbrella-like heads, and they're up to 60 centimeters in diameter. The seeds are dry, flattened and oval and approximately 1 centimeter long with tan color or brown lines extending 3/4 of the seed length. So, you know, Rose's team have brilliant identification guides. Please use them if you think you found giant hogweed in the field. But once again, I will reiterate, do not touch it. So throughout the seasons, so in the spring at the rosette stage, the stems will be green with purple blotches and stiff white bristle hairs. The leaves will form a rosette of jagged, deeply divided leaflets, resembling rhubarb leaves, and the height is typically shorter during the stage than you will see in the summer months. So in the summer, in its flowering stage, the flowers will appear in June and July, as I already mentioned, and they'll be small white or slightly pinky flowers in a clustered head. And stems will be green with blotches, and the leaves will remain large and divided. And in autumn and winter time, we'll see the dry, flattened oval seed heads, approximately 1 centimeter long, with tan brown lines extending 3/4 of the seed length. And the stems and the leaves will begin to die back as the plant completes its life cycle, and dead canes will remain in situ, which you can see on the right-hand side of your screen, just to be aware of. And there is a couple of species that are very easily mistaken for giant hogweed, or similarly the other way around. So the two ones that I think are probably most probable that you'll get that can be confused for is cow's parsnip, or as it's otherwise known as common hogweed, and angelica. So, oh, apologies. So common hogweed in appearance is smaller than giant hogweed, typically reaching about 2 meters and occasionally up to 3 meters. So sometimes a small giant hogweed or a tall common hogweed can sometimes be confusing, but what I find is the easiest telltale sign is the leaves. So the leaves are more rounded and slightly hairy on common hogweed, and the stem is green with sometimes a purple hue, which can once again make it slightly confusing. With giant hogweed, the flowering range is longer, so it flowers from May to August. And once again, it's umbel-shaped flower heads, but it's only up to 20 centimeters across instead of the 60. And for wild angelica, it's tall, but it's definitely not as tall as giant hogweed. And the leaves are a dead giveaway. They're feathery fern-like leaves, so they don't look much like the giant hogweed leaves. And they have a green stem without any purple blotches. They flower from June to August, and it's once again umbel-shaped flower clusters. But if you have any concerns and you're not sure if it's giant hogweed or not, don't touch. Reach out, take a picture, and let us know, and we'll be able to help you with your identification. Management of giant hogweed. So there's lots of different methods to manage. So I'm just going to run through these very quickly because I'm aware of to make sure we have time for questions. So we can do seed head removal. By removing the seeds before they mature, you can prevent them from the plant from spreading further, which helps minimize further growth. However, it's labor intensive and the timing is crucial. So it must be done before the seeds mature, otherwise it won't be effective. Taproot cutting. So it's a targeted approach. Cutting the taproot below the growth point can kill the plant. However, precision is required. Cutting too high or too low may result in regrowth. And it's very labor and skill intensive. Hand pulling is very effective for small infestations, but we have to be very aware of the toxic sap. If you're doing any removal with giant hogweed, to have a professional there, but also they will be wearing a full hazmat suit for doing this due to how dangerous the sap is. Mowing, it's great because regular mowing can prevent seed production and it helps control the height. However, timing matters. Mowing before flowering to avoid seed dispersal. And once again, if you're mowing can sometimes stimulate growth, so just something to be aware of. Grazing is brilliant because it's a natural control. Livestock can graze on giant hogweed. It can eat the plants and reduce seed production. A couple of cons are that not all animals will eat it, and there is possibility of seed spreading via manure of the animals. So that's just something to be aware of. Ploughing can cause root disruption. Ploughing destroys extensive plants and prevents germinating. However, it can cause erosion, and once again, a lot of our giant hogweed is growing along riverbanks, so ploughing's not always going to be an option available to us. Herbicides are very effective control, and when properly applied, herbicides kill the plant. However, chemical use may harm non-target species, and it may require multiple treatments. And excavation of and disposal to landfill, so it will completely remove the plant entirely. However, the cost is still going to be a factor with taking it to landfill, and there may be some toxic sap handling, so it's something to be aware of. Just as another reminder, remember the choice of the management method depends on factors like the scale of the infestation, available resources, and environmental consideration. Always prioritize safety and follow best practice. I always advise consult invasive species specialists. They'll be able to tell you what is best for your site. And I think that is me. So it's just if anyone had any questions. And I want to thank everyone for coming to the training session, and I hope everyone feels that they got something out of it. And I just want to reiterate that you can contact NIA or an invasive species specialist if you have any concerns regarding invasives. So I think, Eamon, we can we can open the training up now if
Yeah,
anyone has any
that's
questions.
great. And again, thanks very much to yourself and to Rose. A very informative brief. And yeah, we will open it up there. If anyone wants to put a question into the group, we had one or two questions already, and they got answered directly. And if anyone wants any further information there, feel free to speak or to put it into the group. It's no problem. But I'll just make people aware as well, the attendees, that it's going to be up in a couple of days' time, and we will edit it, and we will put this recording up on YouTube, so it will be there on the LELP website. So there'll be a link available there for anyone that wants to tap into it and use it for further info going forward. And as well as that, there's a lot of resources out there. So they were all referred to and alluded to there, both in the NIA and FODC, and both LELP, Lough Landscape Partnership. We have a number of resources there available for education and for training as well. So if anyone wants to hit us up, by all means do at any stage throughout. So yeah, I think that's it. Doesn't seem to be any questions coming in. So it's late in the evening, I suppose. That's the main contributing factor to that. And oh, Lisa, yeah, go ahead.
Can you hear me?
Yep, go ahead, Lisa.
I was just a quick question. How effective are apps such as Picture This to kind of determine if species types?
So personally, I wouldn't rely 100% on apps. I think they're great when you're starting out as a wee helpful guide. But I think definitely consulting experts is the main thing, taking pictures, so you can go back to the likes of Rose to ask them. But I do find when I was starting out learning about not just invasive species but plant species in general, I found apps were a great way to get an initial sort of idea of what it could be, and then I would go back to my books and look at them, because I think the books do tend to be a bit more better, because you're having to look at all the different whether it's nodes or whether it's leaf shape. It's a little bit better in my opinion. Don't know if Rose, you have anything to add on that?
Yeah, you can get some really weird answers from apps, sort of be sent off in the wrong direction. Although I would encourage you to use the iRecord app just to record what you're saying. But I don't know if any of you are aware that MBDC have just published a fabulous little guidebook for all the invasive plants in Ireland. It's amazing, we think. It was up on social media today, but I can put a link into the chat if anybody's interested. I think,
but I suppose any guide,
€14 or something like that, I think.
any of the apps are useful for a guide, I suppose, and then it's getting that I suppose, and it's been referred to as well, getting that professional and meticulous look at the plant then going forward, Amy and Rose. Would that be correct in saying?
Yes,
Yeah,
I would agree.
If you enter it on iRecord, we get an email within 2 minutes, so we can help you right away, sort of thing.
Great. Lisa, I hope that answers your question.
Surely, thank you.
Thanks a million. And so we have another question in there from Jared, and Jared is asking. I'll throw it open to both Rose and Amy. Is there any official help from government to assist in the removal of giant hogweed?
It depends on sort of what sort of landowner you are. There's obviously, if you're in a community group or any of the NGOs or farmers can apply through environmental farming schemes or the water quality grants. There's all sorts of funding on. If you go to the DAERA website, you can see all the funding available. Giant hogweed is one of the plants that's named on the environmental farming scheme. So it really depends what sort of landowner you are, really.
Amy, do you have anything to add to that at all?
I know, just to reiterate what Rose said, we don't currently at local government level have any assistance at the moment, but we would be happy to help point you in the right direction of grants. If you want to get in touch with me, I'd be happy to point you in the direction of people who might be better able to assist. That's
great, Jared. I hope that answers your question. Hopefully that clears up matters. And again, anyone post this webinar, if anyone does have any questions, feel free to hit us up. Again, it's info@lelp.org.uk. So that's info@lelp.org.uk. Anybody, any other questions there at all? Yeah, Sean, go ahead. You're on mute there, Sean, at the minute. So down at the bottom left, if you unmute yourself, if you hover the course or over that. You're still on mute, Sean. Yeah, you're good, Sean. There, go ahead.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Just see the Japanese knotweed there. I've identified in different places along like the cycle paths and different. How do I notify about that? Is it road service or council?
So that would really depend. So it would probably depend on who is the landowner there. And I know that sometimes gets a bit confusing, Sean. But if you put it into the iRecord app, Rose will be able to identify whether it is Japanese knotweed, but I'm sure, Sean, you know yourself what it is. But if you have my email anyway, Sean, after
Yes,
this.
yes.
If you point it out to me, I'll be able to tell you whether it's council owned or not. And however, we manage all our Japanese knotweed to some level. So, but if you let me know, I'll be able to tell you whether it's within our jurisdiction or not.
That's great, Amy. Thank you. And one more question is about the grey squirrel Rose mentioned.
Can I just add a bit about Japanese knotweed there, Sean?
Go ahead, sorry.
Unfortunately, Japanese knotweed's not covered in this latest legislation, so it's not actually illegal to have it on your land, and there's no sort of statutory enforcement. So knowing who the landowner is doesn't always help you, because they don't actually have to do anything. So we're endeavouring to try and get legislation changed along that route, because they've changed in GB. They can actually get an ALPO against somebody for having it and not looking after it. So as Amy said earlier, councils take responsibility and do their pieces, but some of the others don't, and there's nothing we can do to make them do that. Sorry, you were going to ask about grey squirrel.
Just at Gorge and Glen Forest Park, we're so lucky with so many red squirrels, and just like to know if the council are there to protect to keep the grey squirrels out. I know some other council areas that they feed the red squirrels in the parks, but then
yeah, there's a thing called the Northern Ireland Squirrel Forum. I'm a member, and I think we've now got a squirrel group in nearly every sort of area of the country and every council. So they're all working towards, improving the coverage of the red squirrels. And part of that is to volunteer to do culling of greys. So if there's an area near you that needs that, the volunteers, if you contact the squirrel group, you'll find their details on the DAERA website. They will send somebody out, whether you want to do the trapping yourself, or they'll try and help you. So we try to sort of help anybody that needs that.
But there is no grey squirrels in the park because there's pine martens there. But who monitors the area? Make sure the grey doesn't come in.
So oh, sorry, go ahead, Rose.
No, go for it.
So we do some level of keeping an eye out to make sure to see if we have grey squirrel, and we always promote that people record if they do see grey squirrels in that area, and then at that point myself or someone from NIEA would be out to check and to see if this was the case. So yeah, we do promote that, and it is something that we do keep an eye on.
Yeah.
Just to make sure.
If somebody were to put in a record of a grey squirrel in a red squirrel preferred area, we'll be onto it pretty quickly.
Okay.
Thanks, Sean. Thanks a million. I see there's people just dropping out there now, and does anyone else have any questions there for Amy or for Rose while we've the last few minutes left? I think we pretty much
Exhausted them.
we pretty much covered everything, or we have too many questions maybe, but No, I think we're okay. We'll wrap it up there. Like I said, it's going to be on YouTube in a couple of days, and we can you can use it as an aid to refer back to it, and again, it'll be on the LELP website. And again, just to re-emphasize again, we wouldn't be here tonight without the National Lottery Heritage Fund, Lough Landscape Partnership, who I belong to, and again in partnership with Fermanagh Omagh District Council and the NIEA. So thanks very much for the partnership and collaboration in making this possible, like, you know, and creating that awareness and getting it out there, because before that people were just very ad hoc in what to do, and it's vital that people know. So I think we'll wrap it up there at that. And Amy, Rose, many thanks. Ashley, who was in the background as well, my colleague, thanks very much for providing the IT support, and much appreciated. And yeah, so we'll be in contact in the coming days, in the coming weeks, and in the months, I'm sure.
Brilliant. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much. Thank you. Thank you, guys. Good night.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye.